Here is what the news is not telling you. Yes, gas prices are up. But that is just the first chapter of a much longer and more expensive story that is going to affect your grocery bill, your next flight, the price of your car, the cost of your prescriptions, and the clothes on your back. And most Americans have absolutely no idea these things are connected to the Iran conflict at all. Petroleum is not just what goes in your gas tank. It is inside your prescription medication. It is in the plastic packaging around every item in your grocery cart. It is in the synthetic fibers of your clothing. It is in the fertilizer that determines how much food costs at harvest time later this year. And it is in the jet fuel that has already more than doubled in price since the 28th of February, prompting United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby to warn of an extra $11 billion in annual cost for his company alone. The average domestic flight that cost $167 in February now costs $414 in mid-March. Fertilizer prices are up 40% in under a month. And semiconductor manufacturing is facing a helium shortage warning that could delay car production and electronics for months. I'm breaking down every single hidden shockwave and what it means for your wallet right now. I'm Michael Harris, and welcome back to FinTech Nation US, where we take what is happening in the world and translate it directly into what it means for your money. Everyone watching the news right now is getting a steady stream of coverage about the conflict itself, the military developments, the geopolitical chess moves, the diplomatic back and forth. And yes, gas prices have been the dominant financial headline. But here is the honest truth. Gas prices are just the opening act. The real economic damage from the Iran conflict is building in 5 specific areas that are getting almost no mainstream attention. And by the time the average American consumer feels it fully, the damage will already be well underway. This is not speculation or doom and gloom commentary. We are now nearly 4 weeks into Operation Epic Fury, which began on the 28th of February 2026. We have real data. We have verified forecasts from economists at the Council on Foreign Relations, Deloitte, the World Economic Forum, and supply chain experts at Michigan State University and the University of Maryland. And all of them are pointing in the same direction, toward a consumer economy that is about to feel this conflict in ways that go far deeper than the price of a gallon of gas. So today, we are going deep. We are going to connect the dots between a waterway most Americans could not find on a map and the price of your groceries this summer, the cost of your next flight, the availability of the semiconductors inside your car, and the pharmaceutical products sitting in your medicine cabinet. Every single one of those connections is real, documented, and already in motion. Show your support by liking this video, and let's get into it. Let's start with the piece of this story that is the most misunderstood, and it involves a molecule that almost nobody is thinking about right now. That molecule is petroleum. And the reason it matters so much beyond your gas tank is that crude oil and its derivatives are the raw material for an enormous range of everyday products that have nothing to do with transportation at all. Think about the packaging around the chicken you bought at the grocery store in Dallas last week. Think about the plastic bottle your blood pressure medication comes in. Think about the polyester in your shirt, the rubber in your running shoes, the foam inside your couch. Think about the synthetic fertilizer that Midwest farmers in Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska are applying to their fields right now during spring planting season. Every single one of those things traces back, at some level, to petroleum derivatives, and many of those derivatives either come from, or are priced against, supply chains that flow directly through the Strait of Hormuz. Craig Geske, Vice President of Strategic Solutions at a major logistics and transportation management company, laid it out plainly. Petrochemical inputs, plastics, rubber, electronics, batteries, pharmaceuticals, and sugar are all sectors currently facing supply chain stress because of the Strait of Hormuz closure. And here is the timeline that should concern you. The initial disruption at the port level takes roughly 10 to 14 days to appear. But the real pressure, the kind that shows up as price increases at the retail level, typically hits within 2 to 5 weeks. As diverted cargo containers arrive in clusters, terminal congestion rises, and transportation demand outpaces what trucks and chassis can handle. We are right inside that window right now. But here's what's shocking, and this is the part that is going to hit American consumers in a way they are completely unprepared for. The fertilizer situation is arguably more consequential to your long-term cost of living than anything else happening in this conflict. More than 1/3 of globally traded fertilizer passes through the Strait of Hormuz. The most important of those fertilizers is urea, a nitrogen-based product that is the world's most widely used agricultural input and is produced using natural gas as its primary feedstock. Since the conflict began on the 28th of February, Urea prices have surged from somewhere between $400 and $490 per metric ton all the way to around $700 per metric ton by mid-March. That is roughly a 50% increase in the cost of the single most important agricultural input in the world in under 3 weeks. Ammonia prices, another critical fertilizer component, are up around 20%. And the broader fertilizer price index has climbed 40% from the start of the conflict through late March. Qatar, one of the world's largest producers of urea, has shut down production at its largest manufacturing facility as LNG output has been severely disrupted. Now let me explain why this matters so directly to you personally. Zippy Duval, president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, wrote directly to President Trump last week warning that U.S. farmers could face significantly higher input costs this growing season as a result of the global fertilizer disruption. The United States imports roughly 20% of its total fertilizer use from global markets. And while American farmers source nitrogen fertilizers like urea from a range of suppliers, including Canada and Trinidad, the global price shock is universal. When urea costs 50% more on the world market, American farmers pay more regardless of where their specific shipment originated. And when input costs go up at the farm level, they flow downstream to food processors, to distributors, to grocery store shelves in Atlanta, in Phoenix, in Houston, and in Chicago. Wolf Research chief economist Stephanie Roth estimated that the fertilizer disruption alone could raise food-at-home inflation by roughly 2 percentage points. That adds on top of the energy inflation that is already running through the system. The critical thing to understand here is the lag. Veronica Nye, chief economist at the Fertilizer Institute, made this point clearly. The cost pass-through from higher fertilizer prices to higher grocery prices is not immediate. It takes a growing season, a harvest, and a distribution cycle, which means the food price consequences of this spring's fertilizer shock may not be fully felt at the checkout counter until summer or autumn of 2026. That means Americans who are budgeting right now based on current grocery prices may be significantly underestimating what their food costs will look like 6 months from now. And here is where it gets even more interesting. Because most people watching the news are focused on gas prices, while one of the most dramatic financial shocks from this conflict is actually happening at the airport. Jet fuel has more than doubled in price since the conflict began, up over 106% from a month ago, according to the International Air Transport Association's data through the week ended the 20th of March. That is not a rounding error. That is a complete transformation of the airline industry's cost structure in under 30 days. United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby put a number on it that should wake up every American who has a flight booked for the next 12 months. If fuel prices remain at their current levels, United alone would face an extra $11 billion in annual jet fuel costs. American Airlines has already said it will be forced to spend an additional $400 million just in the current quarter. The average transcontinental domestic flight, New York to Los Angeles, Chicago to San Diego, Dallas to Seattle, went from $167 in late February to $414 by mid-March. That is a 148% increase on a domestic ticket in under 3 weeks. And Tourism Economics, one of the leading travel forecasting firms, is projecting that airfares will be 5 to 10% higher than previously forecast across all of 2026 and 2027. That forecast assumes some degree of resolution. United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby is actually preparing for a worst-case scenario where oil prices reach as high as $175 per barrel and stay above $100 all the way through the end of 2027. Before we go further, smash that like button if this is already connecting dots you had not connected before. And hit subscribe right now because this is exactly the kind of content we bring to this channel every single week. Drop a comment below and tell me this. Which hidden impact surprised you most so far? The fertilizer and food chain, the airfare spike, or what we are about to get into next? I want to hear from you. Now let me explain the helium and semiconductor angle, because this one genuinely blindsides people when they first hear it, and it has direct implications for car prices, electronics costs, and the technology sector over the next 6 to 12 months. 1/3 of the world's helium supply comes from Qatar. Helium is not just what goes into party balloons. It is a critical industrial gas used in the manufacturing of semiconductors, the tiny chips that are inside virtually every piece of technology you own, including your car. Modern vehicles contain anywhere from several dozen to over 100 semiconductors. Without a stable helium supply, semiconductor fabrication plants face production slowdowns. And semiconductor shortages, as Americans already experienced painfully during the pandemic era of 2021 and 2022, translate directly into vehicle production delays, higher car prices, and longer wait times for everything from laptops to medical imaging equipment. The Chicago Federal Reserve president addressed this directly in a recent interview with PBS NewsHour, pointing out that beyond energy, the conflict is creating real pressure on sectors including pharmaceuticals, fertilizer, and helium. He noted that the manufacturing-intensive nature of the Midwest economy, particularly automotive, makes this especially acute. He described conversations with major auto executives who reminded him that just-in-time manufacturing means that virtually everything going into a car is in a truck or a ship at any given moment rather than sitting in a warehouse. When transportation costs surge and supply chains get disrupted, that model breaks fast. And then there is the pharmaceutical angle, one that receives almost no coverage but that affects tens of millions of Americans who rely on prescription medications. The Center for American Progress noted that the conflict has already disrupted 18% of air cargo globally, forcing major logistics shifts for carriers now seeking to avoid the Gulf region. Pharmaceutical supply chains, particularly for generic medications manufactured in Asia, often export through Gulf ports before reaching the United States. As those routes get rerouted or delayed, and as air freight costs surge because jet fuel has more than doubled, the cost and availability of certain medications faces real pressure. This is not a hypothetical future risk. The rerouting is already happening. Here is the kicker, and this is the layer that most personal finance conversations are not reaching yet. Supply chain professor Jason Miller at Michigan State University was asked directly, if the war ended today, how quickly would all of this normalize? His answer was sobering. Even in that optimistic scenario, it would take months before production is fully restored and consumer prices start to come down across these sectors. The economic echo of this conflict will outlast the conflict itself. That is the realistic timeline Americans need to plan around. The World Economic Forum made this point with unusual directness in a recent analysis. The war's cascading economic fallout is now reshaping global commodity markets, food systems, industrial supply chains, financial conditions, and geopolitical alignments, potentially for years to come. What begins as a battlefield shock hardens into a geoeconomic one. That framing matters because it tells you this is not a situation that resolves in a news cycle. The structural damage to supply chains, fertilizer markets, semiconductor inputs, and airline economics does not disappear when the shooting stops. It takes quarters, not weeks, to work through the system. Now let me break down what the smart financial response looks like given everything we have just covered, because information without action is just anxiety. On airfare, if you have summer travel planned from Chicago to Miami, from Los Angeles to New York, or anywhere else in the country, the advice from United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby himself was to book now before prices climb further. Tourism Economics is forecasting 5 to 10% higher than expected fares through 2026 and 2027. The window to lock in relatively lower prices is narrowing. And if you are a frequent traveler, this is the right environment to actually maximize whatever airline miles or credit card travel rewards you have accumulated, because the cash cost of those tickets is going up while the points redemption value often stays more stable. On groceries, start budgeting now for food costs to trend higher over the next 3 to 6 months, even if you are not seeing dramatic increases at the checkout counter yet. The fertilizer price shock is baked in. The supply chain lag is real. Wolf Research's estimate of a 2 percentage point increase in food-at-home inflation is a serious projection from a credible firm. That is real money, and it hits lower and middle-income American families disproportionately hard because food represents a larger share of their total budget. Families in Houston, in Philadelphia, and San Antonio who are already stretched by 3 years of elevated prices need to be planning for this, not reacting to it. On credit card debt, this is the most urgent action item for any American who is currently carrying a balance. Interest rates on credit cards are averaging between 20 and 27% APR across the country. With the Federal Reserve's rate cut plans now effectively on hold, and some analysts raising the possibility of rate hikes if inflation becomes embedded, that 20 to 27% rate is not going down anytime soon. Every single extra dollar you can put toward your credit card balance right now is generating a guaranteed return equivalent to your interest rate. There is no investment available to a retail investor that beats a guaranteed 20+% return with zero risk. Pay the debt down aggressively. On investments, the discipline here is to not react. The S&P 500 has delivered 8 to 10% average annual returns over decades, and that average includes every war, every oil shock, every recession, and every geopolitical crisis in modern American history. Panic selling into conflict-driven volatility is one of the most reliably wealth-destroying behaviors in personal finance. Dollar cost averaging, putting consistent contributions into your retirement account every month regardless of what the market is doing, is still the right approach. Stay the course. On cars, if you are in the market for a new or used vehicle in the next 6 to 12 months, understand that semiconductor supply pressures from helium shortages could begin to create production constraints at auto manufacturers over the coming months. We have seen this movie before with the pandemic-era chip shortage, and it ended with car prices spiking dramatically and inventory drying up. It is too early to know whether this conflict will produce the same outcome, but it is not too early to be aware of the risk and factor it into your purchasing timeline. And finally, on the broader economic picture, Goldman Sachs raised its recession probability estimate to 30% for the next 12 months. The OECD revised its U.S. inflation forecast up to 4.2% for 2026, compared to its December projection of 3%. The Federal Reserve, which was widely expected to deliver at least one or two rate cuts this year, is now effectively frozen. And the word stagflation, slow growth combined with persistent inflation, is back in serious economic discussion for the first time in decades. These are the conditions your personal finances need to be built to withstand. Let me quickly recap what we covered today. The Iran conflict that began on the 28th of February 2026 is generating 5 hidden economic shockwaves that most Americans are not yet connecting to their daily financial lives. The fertilizer shock is the most consequential long-term threat to your grocery bill, with urea prices up roughly 50%, ammonia up 20%, and the broader fertilizer index up 40% since the conflict began. That price surge will take one growing season to fully flow through to food costs, meaning your grocery bill this summer and autumn could be meaningfully higher than today, even if the conflict ends soon. The airfare shock is already in full effect right now, with the average domestic transcontinental ticket having surged from $167 to $414 in under 3 weeks, and forecasters projecting fares 5 to 10% higher than expected across 2026 and 2027. The helium and semiconductor risk threatens car prices and electronics costs over the next 6 to 12 months, echoing the painful chip shortage Americans experienced after the pandemic. The pharmaceutical and air cargo disruption is real and already in motion, with 18% of global air cargo already rerouted as carriers avoid the Gulf region. And the broader macro environment, with Goldman Sachs raising recession odds to 30% and the OECD projecting 4.2% U.S. inflation for 2026, means the financial foundation Americans are standing on is shakier than it was just 30 days ago. Your action plan. Book your summer flights now before prices climb further. Start budgeting for higher grocery costs over the next 3 to 6 months. Attack your credit card debt aggressively before rate relief disappears entirely. Stay the course on your long-term investments without panic selling. And keep a close eye on the auto market if you are planning a vehicle purchase this year. Click that like button if this video gave you a clearer picture of what is really happening to your finances right now. Subscribe to FinTech Nation US because this is what we do. We go deeper than the headlines and bring you the financial story that actually matters for your daily life. Drop a comment below and tell me, which hidden impact is hitting your household the hardest right now? The grocery costs, the airfare, or the general economic uncertainty? I read every single comment. Share this video with someone in your life who is feeling the financial pressure of this moment but has not connected it to what is happening overseas, because they deserve to understand the full picture. Next video, we are going deep on the stagflation risk and what it would actually look like for your personal budget in 2026 and 2027, and the specific moves that protected everyday Americans during the last time this country went through something like this. You do not want to miss it. Until then, stay sharp, stay informed, and protect your money.